Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we're pulling back the curtain on stories the establishment press would rather you skim past. We've got 5 major stories spanning 3 continents, and when you connect the dots, they paint a disturbing picture of how power operates in 2026. From the drums of war with Iran to bullets fired at medical workers in Gaza, this is the show where we don't look away. Maya, let's get right into it.
Let's start with the big one, Alex. Al Jazeera published a critical piece today examining how the Trump administration's escalation with Iran is following a disturbingly familiar script. We're talking about the 2003 Iraq playbook, conflicting intelligence, vague homeland threats, and a media ecosystem that's already manufacturing consent. But here's what makes this worse: they've learned from Iraq's mistakes. Not to avoid war, but to sell it more effectively this time around. The intelligence isn't being cherry-picked the same way, it's being strategically ambiguated.
That's exactly right. In 2003, the Bush administration had to fabricate specific claims: weapons of mass destruction, yellowcake uranium, aluminum tubes. Colin Powell sat in front of the United Nations with literal props. The problem was specificity. Specific claims can be debunked. What the current administration has figured out is that if you keep the threat vague, Iran poses an existential threat to the homeland, we have intelligence suggesting imminent danger, you create a fog that's almost impossible to cut through. You can't fact-check a feeling, and that's by design.
And let's talk about who benefits from this escalation, because it's certainly not the American public. Defense contractors are already seeing stock surges on escalation rhetoric alone. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, their quarterly projections are baked with conflict assumptions. The Saudi and Emirati governments have been pushing for a harder line on Iran for over a decade. And domestically, nothing rallies a base like a wartime president. The midterm calculus here is transparent if you're willing to look at it honestly.
What the mainstream coverage consistently fails to mention is the human cost projections. Iran is not Iraq. It has roughly 88 million people, a sophisticated missile program, and proxy networks across the entire region. Military analysts, the ones not on cable news panels, are projecting catastrophic civilian casualties on both sides if this escalates to direct conflict. We're talking about a regional conflagration that could pull in Hezbollah, destabilize Iraq again, and send energy prices into a spiral that hits working families hardest.
And here's the historical parallel that should terrify everyone. After Iraq, we got the Senate Intelligence Committee report confirming the intelligence was manipulated. We got the Shilkut inquiry in the UK. Exposed the lies, documented the failures. And what happened? Nothing. No accountability. No prosecutions. The architects of that war went on book tours and got professorships. The lesson the national security establishment learned wasn't "don't lie to start wars." It was "you can lie to start wars and face zero consequences." That's the precedent operating right now.
And the media's role cannot be overstated. In 2003, outlets like the New York Times and Washington Post amplified administration claims with minimal scrutiny. Judith Miller's reporting was essentially Pentagon stenography. Today the mechanism is different but the effect is identical. Instead of single flagship reporters carrying water, you have an entire ecosystem of think tank analysts, former generals on retainer, and social media influence operations creating a consensus atmosphere. By the time the average person encounters the Iran story, the framing is already set: Iran is the aggressor, America is responding.
Let's pivot to what's actually happening to people on the ground in Gaza, because this next story is gut-wrenching and it connects directly to the impunity we're discussing. Al Jazeera is reporting on a new investigation revealing that Israeli forces fired over 900 bullets at a Palestinian medical convoy in March of 2025, killing 15 aid workers. 900 bullets, Alex. At a medical convoy. These weren't combatants. These were people trying to save lives, and they were systematically targeted.
Let that number sit with our audience for a moment. 900 rounds fired at clearly marked medical vehicles. Under international humanitarian law, the Geneva Conventions, which both the United States and Israel are signatories to, medical personnel and vehicles are explicitly protected. Targeting them isn't a gray area. It isn't collateral damage. It is a war crime, full stop. And this wasn't a split-second battlefield decision. 900 bullets represent sustained, deliberate fire. Someone gave that order, and someone carried it out knowing exactly what those vehicles were.
And this isn't an isolated incident. It fits a documented pattern. We've seen the World Central Kitchen strike that killed 7 aid workers in April 2024. We've seen UN facilities hit repeatedly. We've seen journalists killed in numbers unprecedented in modern conflict, over 150 Palestinian journalists since October 2023, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. What this report adds is forensic specificity. The bullet count, the trajectory analysis, the timeline reconstruction, this is the kind of evidence that would be Exhibit A in any functioning international court.
But here's what the mainstream press won't say plainly: the reason there's no accountability is American diplomatic cover. Every UN Security Council resolution calling for investigation or ceasefire has been vetoed by the United States. The weapons being used, the rifles that fired those 900 rounds, the ammunition, are American-made, supplied under bilateral military aid agreements. American taxpayers funded those bullets. That's not editorial opinion, that's the budget line item. When we talk about complicity, it's not abstract. It's fiscal. It's documented. It's policy.
Which brings us perfectly to our third story, because people are starting to act on exactly this kind of complicity. More than 1,000 UK councillors have now signed a Palestine pledge as local elections approach. This campaign, reported by Al Jazeera, is specifically pressuring local authorities to divest from Israeli weapons manufacturers. This is grassroots democratic action targeting the financial infrastructure of occupation, and it's gaining momentum at a pace that should worry the establishment.
1,000 councillors is a remarkable number, and here's why it matters structurally. Local councils in the UK manage pension funds, procurement contracts, and investment portfolios worth billions collectively. When a councillor signs this pledge, they're committing to audit those financial entanglements and push for divestment from companies like Elbit Systems, BAE Systems, and others profiting from the occupation. This is the BDS model: boycott, divestment, sanctions, operating at the institutional level, and history shows us it works. It worked against apartheid South Africa, and the parallels are becoming impossible to deny.
What's significant about the timing is that local elections are looming in the UK. Politicians are responding to constituent pressure, which means the Palestine issue has become electorally consequential in a way the establishment parties didn't anticipate. Labour under Keir Starmer has hemorrhaged support in Muslim-majority constituencies precisely because of its stance on Gaza. The Councillor Pledge movement is translating moral outrage into political leverage, and that's the kind of organising that actually shifts policy. This isn't hashtag activism, this is balance sheet activism.
And notice how this story gets covered, or rather, doesn't get covered, in mainstream British media. When it is mentioned, the framing is almost always about anti-Semitism concerns rather than the substantive policy demand, which is simply, stop investing public money in companies that manufacture weapons used against civilians. That's a position supported by international law, multiple UN resolutions, and the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion. But the media gatekeepers would rather debate whether divestment is inherently anti-Semitic than engage with the documented reality of what those weapons are doing.
Now let's connect this to our fourth story, which on the surface seems unrelated but reveals the same global pattern of power consolidating itself. Jeremy Corbyn has won the leadership of the Year party, beating Zarah Sultana in a leadership vote, as reported by Middle East Eye. For anyone who's followed UK politics, this is a seismic moment. Corbyn was systematically destroyed by the British establishment, his own party, the media, the intelligence services, precisely because he threatened the consensus on foreign policy, austerity, and corporate power.
Let's be clear about what happened to Corbyn. Here was a man who, as Labour leader, proposed modest social democratic policies, nationalised rail, free broadband, increased NHS funding, and a foreign policy that prioritised diplomacy over military intervention. For this, he was subjected to the most coordinated media smear campaign in modern British political history. The anti-Semitism allegations, many of which were later shown to be vastly exaggerated by internal Labour reports, were weaponized not to protect Jewish communities but to neutralize a political threat to the military-industrial consensus.
And the fact that he's now leading a new party tells you two things. First, there is a substantial political constituency in the UK that wants an alternative to the Starmer-Sunak consensus, particularly on Palestine, on austerity, and on war. Second, the establishment's attempt to permanently exile Corbyn from political life has failed. He was expelled from Labour, stripped of the whip, and told his political career was over. Instead, he won his seat as an independent and has now built an entirely new political vehicle. That's resilience that the commentariat didn't predict because they don't understand grassroots movements.
The significance for our broader theme tonight is this: Corbyn represents the kind of politics that challenges the war machine directly. He opposed the Iraq War. He's been a consistent advocate for Palestinian rights. He's challenged NATO expansion and arms deals with Saudi Arabia. The ferocity of the campaign against him was proportional to the threat he posed, not to national security, but to the profits of defense contractors and the foreign policy assumptions that keep Western nations permanently entangled in Middle Eastern conflicts. His return to party leadership is a signal that those politics haven't been defeated, despite everything thrown at them.
And watch how the media covers this, Alex. It'll be framed as a sideshow, a vanity project, an irrelevance. They said the same thing about every insurgent political movement before it became consequential. What they won't analyze is why Corbyn won. Why, after years of smears, did members of a new party overwhelmingly choose him? Because the material conditions that created his movement haven't changed. Housing is still unaffordable. The NHS is still crumbling. And Britain is still selling weapons used to kill civilians. People are looking for leaders who will name those realities, and Corbyn does.
Let's move to our final story, and it's one that requires us to look east. The South China Morning Post is reporting that China's top legislature, the National People's Congress, has removed 9 military officials from its deputy list ahead of the annual, 2-sessions political meetings. Among those removed are 5 full generals, 1 lieutenant general, and 3 major generals. This is being reported as routine housekeeping, but anyone who understands Chinese politics knows this is anything but routine. This is a purge, and it tells us something critical about the internal dynamics of the world's second-largest military power.
Let's put this in context. Xi Jinping has been conducting the most extensive military purge since the founding of the People's Republic. Over the past 2 years, we've seen the removal of defense ministers, the disappearance of senior rocket force commanders, and now the quiet stripping of NPC credentials from generals. The pattern suggests deep-seated concerns about corruption, loyalty, or both within the PLA's senior ranks. 5 full generals removed simultaneously is extraordinary. These are the highest-ranking officers in the Chinese military, and their removal signals that she trusts neither their competence nor their allegiance.
Here's what the Western press typically misses about these purges. They're analyzed through a Cold War lens, either as signs of Xi's authoritarian consolidation or as evidence of PLA weakness. Both framings serve the Pentagon's narrative needs. If Xi is consolidating, he's a dangerous strongman we need to counter. If the PLA is weak, it validates increased military spending. What's rarely discussed is the corruption dimension. These removals often follow investigations into procurement fraud, where officials skimmed billions from weapons programs, meaning equipment the PLA depends on may not function as designed. That's a readiness crisis, not a power play.
And the timing matters enormously. The 2 sessions, the NPC and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, are where China's annual policy priorities get formalized. Removing 9 military deputies right before this meeting sends an unmistakable message to every officer in the PLA: no one is untouchable. It's discipline through demonstration. But it also raises questions about military readiness that should concern everyone watching the Taiwan Strait, the South China Sea, and the broader Indo-Pacific. If Xi doesn't trust his own generals, what does that mean for crisis decision-making?
And here's the connection our audience needs to see. While the United States is beating the drums for conflict with Iran, while Israel is firing 900 rounds at medical convoys with American weapons, China is quietly restructuring its military command. These aren't isolated events. They're all expressions of the same global dynamic, great powers preparing for a more confrontational era while civilian populations bear the costs. The defense budgets go up everywhere. The arms manufacturers profit everywhere. And the people who pay, in taxes, in blood, in destroyed futures, are everywhere too.
Let's pull this all together, because the through line tonight is impunity. The United States operates with impunity when it manufactures consent for war with Iran, because no one was held accountable for Iraq. Israel operates with impunity when it fires on medical convoys, because American vetoes shield it from international law. Arms manufacturers operate with impunity, because their profits are protected by the very governments that claim to uphold human rights. And political leaders who challenge this system get crushed, as Corbyn was, though not permanently, as his return demonstrates.
But here's what gives me hope, and I think this is the most important takeaway tonight. 1,000 UK councillors signed that Palestine pledge. That's 1,000 elected officials saying not with our money. Corbyn won his leadership election because ordinary people refused to accept the establishment's verdict. Investigative journalists documented those 900 bullets because the truth has advocates who won't stop digging. The system depends on our silence and our despair. Every story we covered tonight also contains evidence that people are refusing to comply.
That's exactly right. The Iran escalation playbook only works if we let it work. If enough people call it out now, before the bombs fall, before the "we were wrong" retrospectives 10 years later, it can be stopped. The Iraq War happened because opposition was too slow to organize and too easily dismissed. We don't have that excuse this time. The playbook is visible. The historical record is clear. The question is whether we act on what we know or wait for another Senate report confirming what we already knew all along.
So here's our call to action, and we mean this literally. First, contact your representatives, whether you're in the US, the UK, or anywhere else, and demand they oppose military escalation with Iran. Use specific language. Reference the Iraq precedent. Make it clear this is an electoral issue for you. Second, look into where your local government's money is invested. If it's in arms manufacturers profiting from the occupation of Palestine, demand divestment. The councillor pledge model can be replicated anywhere there's political will.
Third, support independent journalism. The stories we covered tonight came from Al Jazeera, Middle East Eye, and the South China Morning Post, not from the outlets that dominate American and British media. That's not a coincidence. Independent media is the immune system of democracy, and it's under attack everywhere. Subscribe, donate, share their work. Fourth, educate yourself on the mechanisms of consent manufacturing. Read Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent. Read the Shilkit Report. Understand how the machine works so you can recognize it operating in real time.
And finally, refuse despair. That's not a platitude, it's a strategic imperative. The architects of these wars, these arms deals, these cover-ups, they are counting on your hopelessness. They want you to believe that nothing changes, that power is permanent, that resistance is futile. But 1,000 councillors signed a pledge. A systematically destroyed politician rebuilt and won. Journalists counted 900 bullets because they believe accountability is possible. The powerful are not as secure as they pretend to be, and they know it.
That's our show for tonight. Every source we cited is linked in our show notes. We don't ask you to take our word for anything, we ask you to read the primary documents, follow the money, and draw your own conclusions. The truth isn't hidden. It's just inconvenient for the people who profit from lies. I'm Maya Clarity.
And I'm Alex Truth. Stay informed, stay angry, and stay engaged. The world doesn't change itself. We'll see you next time on Truth Report. Good night.